All right, we are back. This is Creativity is Secure. I'm your host, Malcolm Moore, and today I have one of my favorite people on the planet, old friend Dave Cohen. How you doing, Dave?
I'm doing great, Malcolm. How are you?
I'm good. We both grew up in Rochester, New York, so I've got to ask you, how is the weather there today?
Actually, it's a little rainy today, but you know what? The past couple of days, Sally and I just got back here after a little trip, but it was actually warmer here when we got back than it was in California.
Well, you guys,
which is crazy.
You guys have the humidity that we don't really
yes, have. That's the only drawback. We get the humidity, but yeah, it's but we've had, just like every place else, the weather's been really hot just over the summer, so it's nice to get a little bit of a break before it turns into snow.
So shocking that it's rainy there in Rochester. Anyway, for people that don't know, Dave is known for many things, but three of them come to mind for me. He's a great drummer, educator, and store owner. He is also known for being in the band Primetime Funk and many offshoots, which we'll get into later. He lives in Rochester, New York, and how we know each other. We are friends from Rochester, and I was thinking when I woke up today, my first memory of you, I didn't know you yet. I actually think the guy we were just talking about, John McNeil, took me to see you play at Richmond's, I think, and you were with the Stormy Monday Blues Band. Does that sound right?
Okay, that was actually at a club on Goodman Street called Schnozz's.
Oh, right. Schnozz's.
Yep, yeah, we had a band back in the day called the Stormy Monday Blues Band, which was made up of all guys from different bands together. And it was basically a, jam session, sit-in type of thing. And our goal basically every week was to try to get everyone in the band replaced at the same time. And which we did, quite a bit because it was a real fun gig, and musicians would come out, and inevitably you get the drummer that would come up and try to dictate what was going to be played or not played. For example, you get a lot of guys that are definitely afraid of, say, playing a shuffle.
Yeah.
And I would tell them, well, I can't tell these guys what to play, but that's how you're going to learn how to play a shuffle.
Yeah, you know what? I'm 55. I've been playing drums a long time, and I really didn't get good at blues or shuffle until I moved out here 13 years ago, and I had to play a lot of shuffles. So, yeah, it takes a while to get it to feel right, and there's so many different kinds of shuffles.
Yes, that as well. There's so many different variations and kinds, and everybody's got their different spin on it. And, and of course, most of all, it depends on who you're playing with.
Yeah, and I can think of two very extreme examples. How about Stray Cat Strut by the Stray Cats? And then you've got like any Stevie Ray Vaughan song, which is really tight shuffle.
But, and I came up, listening to shuffles in the era of course, listening to, say, either Buddy Rich play a shuffle or Mel Lewis play a shuffle,
right,
or, those kind of cats, and, the different types of approaches. And some of my earliest drum set practicing, I remember in Rochester at the Hochstein School when I was studying with Vinnie Ruggiero, he would have me play to Jimmy Smith organ trio records, which were all shuffles. And that was my lesson. I would sit in the studio, and he had a practice pad set with a real ride cymbal and a real set of hi-hats. And you would just play time for, say, he'd put on like Jimmy Smith's The Sermon. And you'd play, first you'd play to the 8-minute version, and then you'd play to the 20-minute version.
Oh, man. Wait, did you say it was just ride cymbal and hi-hat?
Yeah, basically, because all the other drums, it was a set of drums, practice pad set. I even think before Remo even made it, there was a company called Phipps, F-I-P-S.
I do remember that. I remember the font was kind of modern.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it was a basic practice pad set, very quiet. And I can't recall if they had, I believe that, he did have regular cymbals on it, but I can't recall if there was a way that they muted the cymbals. But in any event, it was a real, learning experience just focusing on, the ride cymbal in the hi-hat and really learning, how to play the ride cymbal.
Yeah, that's so funny because it's reminding me of when I recently interviewed one of our mutual friends, John McNeil, and he went to Eastman, and he was telling me how one time he saw Steve Gadd going to a rehearsal, and he was in a hurry, and all he had was a ride cymbal and a hi-hat. And then John was like, "Do you need any drums? Do you need to borrow anything?" He goes, "No, I'm good." And apparently he did the gig or the practice with only those two cymbals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you don't need a lot. I mean, look with Steve, I've seen him play on pizza boxes,
Yeah, of course,
all kinds of things, right? So, I mean, he can make, a phone book sound great. Yeah, it's not about the instrument. It's about his touch and his approach and making it musical. I mean, of course, having a great instrument is wonderful and it's going to translate better. But with somebody like him, it's just pure genius.
Well, there's that. You can see the original video with Steve Gadd when he's playing on the pizza box. Yeah. And I'm also thinking for my younger listeners to look up Max Roach, the great jazz drummer, because he was known for doing his hi-hat solo, where that's all that he used.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you go and check, it's on YouTube, but I think it's under something called heading called Mr. Hi-Hat, where he would take the hi-hat out in front, right, and of the drum set at the front of the bandstand, and play literally every part of the hi-hat. Not just the cymbals. He would play the stand, the pull rod, every part of it, and make it musical. And of course, with his technique of what was called fanning the hi-hat, which I could never really master to the point that I wouldn't crack my knuckles on the hi-hat cymbals, But I just love seeing cats that can do that. In fact, I was hanging out last week on this Journey to Jazz cruise a lot with a great drummer named Joe Farnsworth. I don't know if you're familiar with Joe.
Heard of him,
but in fact, he just had he's a drummer from New York, and he just had a big, nice article in the most recent issue of Downbeat, and he's got a great new album out. And he is, to me, I mean, I just had so much fun, watching him and listening to him and getting to speak with him. And to me, he's like a combination of all my favorite drummers in a lot of ways. He's got chops like Buddy Rich. But he's conceptually can play like Max but it's just a cool, really great swinging combination. His thing, he just swings, and he also adopts the thing of really dressing well. When you're playing a gig, I mean, he's always decked out. He's got and I always admired that about him. And he, references that, with other musicians that impressed him in that regard. Really looking like you should be on stage rather than, looking like you just got done cleaning your garage.
Unfortunately, I think I am choice number 2. I'm somewhere, the way I dress when I play drums is somewhere between what Steve Gadd does and Kevin Smith, the director. I'm always going to be found wearing shorts and a t-shirt because I think I sweat too much. I don't know how people play in a suit.
I know. I don't know either. I know how he does it. And I mean, we've all had to do it from time to time, depending on, the type of performance we have. I mean, the worst probably being playing in a tuxedo. But, it's just interesting because I remember, Roy Haynes, of course, being, he was really known for being a quite a hip dresser. And, of course, Miles as well,
Yeah. They don't have to use all 4 of their limbs, though, at least Miles.
Right, that's true.
Before we get deep into drumming, let's go way back in time to when you were a very young Dave Cohen.
Mm-hmm.
What is your first creative memory? And when I ask you that, let's think about how we're both drummers. If I ask you to do a drum solo, you're going to have to think about it and then do it off the top of your head, using all the things you've learned over the years. But it doesn't have to be drumming. So when is the first time you used the creative part of your brain? You thought of something, you executed it, brought it to the physical realm, and you said to yourself, wow, where did that come from?
Well, it does kind of go back to my early drumming. I think I started in probably third or fourth grade. They give you the practice pad. You don't get the real instrument
Yeah, what's
except in
this?
band to play. Yeah, what's this? A hunk of wood with a piece of rubber on it. Okay, and honestly, I don't know what attracted me to drums in terms of choosing an instrument as opposed to clarinet or trumpet or whatever. My family didn't really have a history of music, although I had one uncle who was a musician. But other than that, my parents were not musical at all. But one thing I remember is after I selected the drums, and I'd been playing in, concert band for a while, and of course, being, I was born in 53, which means that at about, 10, 11 years old is when the Beatles came to America, right?
Yeah.
And of course, like everyone of my generation, we saw that and it was like, yeah, that's what I want to do, So, it went from just playing the snare drum, or actually the practice band at home to getting a snare drum.
Yeah.
Finally, it was an old Kent Red Sparkle snare drum, which I wish I still had. But of course,
Wait,
I was not smart about
did you say Red Sparkle? Because my first drum set was Red
Yes.
Sparkle too. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and this was just a snare drum, no other drums. And I was waiting, months for this drum to come in from wherever my dad had ordered it from. Anyway, so I had this snare drum, and of course, in those days, we would, listen to songs on the AM radio, which was playing all the British invasion kind of stuff, along with the other types of music, whether it was Frank Sinatra, Barbra Streisand. It was a pretty wide playlist in terms of genres in those days.
Yeah.
So after seeing the Beatles and the Stones and groups like that, you start listening to it on the radio, and I'm watching the drummers, and even though I don't have a drum set yet, I'm trying to figure out, okay, it looks like I got to keep time with my right hand on something, and I'm playing the snare drum. So I wanted to come up with something, akin to a cymbal, because I didn't have a drum set yet.
Right.
And I had an aunt. My Aunt Rose, she was a buyer for the old Foreman store in Midtown Plaza in Rochester.
I remember that.
And you remember that place?
Yeah.
So anyway, she had, for some reason, given my parents a couple of weird shaped lamps. I mean, I can't even begin to describe them, but one of these lamps had like a round metal plate on it.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
It was a fasten. And I said, I could use that for my cymbal. So I would set the snare drum up and, next to this lamp, and I would just use the right stick on this metal plate that was kind of suspended within this lamp. And that became my cymbal. So, I'd already had some experience by the time I got my first drum set, I think around 12 or 13 years old. So, in terms of thinking about creativity, that's the first thing that I can really remember where I kind of MacGyvered something in a way.
Yeah.
I guess that's a word, and still to this day, I'm doing things like that. You know how it is when you're trying to figure out, for example, how do I mount the garden weasel on my drum set?
That would be Jerry Marotta.
Right, exactly. Well, Jerry gave us that idea, and I've used it in the studio many times, as well as for live gigs, and it never ceases to lead to a lot of conversation when people see it and hear it.
Well, I got to point this out to our younger drummer listeners. If you're playing with a snare drum and you've got a lamp, and you're playing to the TV or the radio, you have to play really quietly, right? Because we didn't really have the headphones, we didn't have streaming, we didn't have electronic drums.
No.
You have to be
none of that stuff. I mean, the most you might have on like a transistor radio would be they would have like an earphone, but it was just one.
The earpiece,
right, but because in those, I don't even think the stuff was in stereo at that point. It was the mono, the records. My parents' record collection was like 101 strings play, the hits of Broadway, that kind of stuff. I mean, I think the hippest record that my dad had in his record collection, and actually it was pretty hip, for time, was he had a couple of albums by a trumpet player from New Orleans named Al Hurt.
Oh, wow.
You remember?
Cool.
I don't know if you remember him.
I vaguely from when I was younger. Yeah, wow.
I mean, to me, he, looking back on it, I think he was sort of the New Orleans version of like somebody like Boots Randolph was to the saxophone, and again, he had hits of his own, but it was like a lot of things, instrumental groups, where they would cover the hits of the day, which, again, takes me back, very early on after the Beatles and the Stones. I remember, I'm sure you probably remember a group called The Ventures.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Hawaii Five-0, which is probably, what they're most well known for. But they had other hits like Walk, Don't Run and Telstar. And they were an instrumental group, guitar-driven group. But they had managed to have hits. And, of course, they were one of these groups that I think they put out an album like every 3 months.
Wow. That's like what Prince wanted to do.
Right, exactly. But almost all their stuff was covers, or it was basically rip-offs of their own previous material, where they would take, something like Telstar and just change a few notes here and there, but it was basically the same song, But I remember, checking those records out, and like I said, they would put one. It seemed like every 3 to 4 months there was a new Ventures album, whether they were covering, Strawberry Fields by the Beatles, or something by the Mamas and Papas, or something by the Beach Boys. It was that kind of thing.
Hopefully they were. I'm thinking if they're playing covers, somebody else is getting the publishing rights. So hopefully they figured out a way to make money.
Yeah, hopefully. Who knows back in those days what was going on with that stuff?
It was a real racket back then. Well, it probably still is too.
Think about it now. I mean, they probably had a better chance of getting paid then than they would now in terms of what streaming services pay.
Yeah. So you said that your parents really weren't creative, but when you find yourself going through life, performing, playing drums, doing all the things that you do you ever think to yourself, oh, I get that from somebody in my family, one of my relatives? Was there anybody creative in your family that you think passed this musical talent down to you?
Like I said, I had an uncle who was a musician, but we weren't really close. He lived in Buffalo, and we didn't really see them all that much. And actually, his son, who actually has the same name as I do, David Cohen.
So weird.
Turned out to be a trumpet player who played with the Chicago Philharmonic and, all kinds of stuff like that, high-end classical player. But other than that, I don't know where the creativity came from, honestly. And it's not to say that my parents were creative. I think my dad was a pretty creative guy. He was a science teacher and later a school administrator. So he was pretty creative in terms of sometimes, just hooking me up with ways to, before I had a decent hardware case, for example, he found he had this old suitcase that he lined inside with carpeting, believe it or not.
Wow.
And so that I could put my snare drum stand and my hi-hat pedal and what little hardware I had, with my first drum set in there, because sometimes I would need to bring some of this stuff into school because whatever the school drum set didn't have a particular part that worked properly.
Right.
My mom, well, she started out as a housewife, and then, of course, she ended up being a receptionist for a local shoe company. I don't know if you remember the company L Tears.
Yes, of course I do.
Back in the day. Yeah, they were one of the biggest local shoe companies in Rochester, and she worked at their main office for a number of years.
Here's a serious question. Do you think creativity could be implemented in curing people, or at least helping people with mental health struggles like depression or anxiety? Any specific insight with yourself or people you've known?
Absolutely. I've seen it with students of mine who, have struggled with either depression or anxiety. to really be able to, focus their attention on something else. And, I tell them, I said, look, you may be having trouble at school. And you don't know what's going on, but something's going on sometimes.
Yeah.
And, obviously drums being so physical, if a kid tells me what's going on, let's say they're having a problem with a kid at school, I said, well, just pretend that snare drum head is the kid's face. Just, not to promote violence or anything, but it's a way to, it's like hitting a punching bag,
right, of course.
You want to get your aggression out, but it also, allows you to focus your mind on something else. Even though maybe some of them, are struggling with the mechanics of what they're doing.
Right.
It's to still feel good. And the most important thing is it has to be fun.
Yeah.
Because if they're having fun, then they're not thinking about, either what's going on at home or what's going on at school. So even if it's just for, half an hour a week, it kind of gets them, into a different realm, where they can relax a little bit and just have some fun. And in that case, usually they're surprised by how quickly the lesson time goes by.
Yeah. And as you know, I'm also a private drum teacher. I have a new student, and she's got definitely some special needs issues going on. Mm-hmm. And I can tell that she's frustrated. Mm-hmm. But when we were working on a song the other day, I had her playing the drums. She couldn't quite get the part right, and she was speeding up. And I asked her to sing along with the song.
Yeah.
So after she did that, after she sang, I said, you played the tempo correctly. You played the song correctly. And I said, do you realize you just did 5 things at once? You're using all 4 of your limbs, and you're singing. And what I didn't tell her is she kind of had some tics, some involuntary vocal things. She didn't do that either. So I think I think beyond even anxiety and depression, when people are struggling with all kinds of things like autism and Tourette's syndrome, they actually get a break from that too. And I think I have seen it help them build more confidence. Yeah,
it's interesting. I have currently are teaching 2 students who are autistic.
Yeah.
And they're, of course, totally different, as you know. I mean, with your experience of teaching autistic kids, is that I have one who is very verbal. He's, he plays multiple instruments. He's very creative.
Yeah.
And the other one is very difficult. He's very nonverbal. He has a number of other health issues, but it's interesting for me as a teacher, just trying to, get them to really focus on stuff. And when they do, he'll follow me along. And the other thing that I find interesting is sometimes we'll be playing along to, songs that he likes, or, and he's happens to be a big Elvis fan. So we'll be playing, some Elvis tunes, whether it's, Heartbreak Hotel or whatever. And he's very good at keeping time with his hands.
Yeah.
He's not so good with his right foot on the bass drum. But what I noticed was sometimes when we're playing along, he can play his bass drum in such a way where it's not on the beat, but it's consistently off the beat in the same place. Or he can play things with the bass drum, and obviously he's not cognizant of what he's doing, but if you transcribed it, it would be, like something that Frank Zappa would have asked Vinnie Ruggiero to play. You know what I mean? It's just like, he's doing this, and eventually he will get back. It's almost like, when you listen to King Crimson or Beat, and they're playing in different time signatures at the same time, and they finally, at a certain point, it always resolves.
Well, I've always found it fascinating. A lot of drummers that I like don't play the stereotypical correct way. They might hold their sticks differently. They might play differently.
Sure.
Like, I love the Velvet Underground, and I love how Mo Tucker would just stand up and play this group of drums that was, I recently did a fundraiser with the band Yola Tango, and same thing. Drummer standing up, playing unconventional, but it really works. And I also recently saw Nick Cave, and all the guys in the band play their instruments really bizarrely. I just think it's fascinating. I mean, for that kid that you're working with, that's how he perceives the beat. And it doesn't mean it's
Right.
wrong. It's wrong. That's his.
No, exactly. Exactly. And I just went to last week, I was in a master class with, you familiar with a jazz drummer named Carl Allen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, from New York, Philly. And he was, going back to what you were talking about with singing.
Yeah.
Because he was playing and he was basically singing the melody of the song, and talking about phrasing. And I asked him, because I always felt that it's extremely important for drummers to use your voice to articulate what you want to play.
Yeah.
If you can say it, you have a much better chance of being able to play. Singing along and breathing with the music and learning about phrasing. I mean, obviously, jazz drummers, we have a history of this kind of thing, and really trying to emulate the phrasing of horn players and thinking in that way, thinking not only of the drums as a rhythmic instrument, but also in terms of melody.
Yeah, I have two things to say about that. So when I was growing up, I took drums from a few different drum teachers, and very briefly, I took from Steve Curry, great jazz drummer.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget, this made me really mad when he had me do this. He wrote out the saxophone part for Charlie Parker's confirmation. And he's like, you're going to learn the rhythm on the snare drum of this melody. So I ended up having to learn that. But it was so cool, and I never forgot it. So I think that goes along with what you're saying, learning the melody, learning everything that's going on. And you're also making me think of, I think the drummer who influenced me more than anyone in my life is still Bill Bruford.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I loved about his drumming, and still to this day, because he's come out of retirement now, he's such a melodic drummer. And so I met Bill a couple times. I read a lot of interviews, and turns out he got most of that playing melodies on drums from Max Roach. So that made me go back in time. And I found that out also because I remember when Bill did Max's song, The Drum Also Waltzes. And if you haven't heard either of these drummers, that is a great place to start.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you gotta go back to Max. I mean, he basically invented licks that every drummer still plays. They may not know that, but they do. And he really brought that melodic aspect to the drums, and also just, analyzing his phrasing.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing about being able to sing along with the melody of these tunes and eventually be able to play the melody on the drums. It really hits you to less type of cookie cutter type phrasings, also phrasings over the bar line and over the beat, those kinds of things, repetitive phrases when you're playing in 4/4 that are actually in 3/4. Things like that. And it really just expands your ability to hear the music. Rather than focusing on what you're doing, you want to be able to hear how what you're doing hopefully fits with everything else that's going on, because particularly in jazz, it's really kind of like a book club where everybody's maybe read the same book and now you're having a conversation about it.
Yeah. I remember when I was really getting into drummers using melodies, when Peter Gabriel did that soundtrack to the Scorsese movie, Last Temptation of Christ, he put the album out, Passion, which is, if anybody hasn't heard that, it's one of the most incredible albums ever done. But a fascinating thing about that is the drummer is Billy Cobham on there. And I think Peter put the effect later on the drums, but if you listen to the toms, they're playing a lot of the main melodies, like Bill Bruford used to do with David Torn and stuff like that with the Simmons drums, because you could you could program chords into there. And Bill went on to do that with his jazz band, Earthworks.
Right.
And even today, when I go teach students, I always do rudiments, and then I do drum set things I think they should learn, or songs that I think are important. But I always ask the kids what they like. And I'll never forget, about 5 years ago, Kendrick Lamar and The Weeknd did this song, Pray. And it's so incredible. It's all computer, but it was interesting to learn how to play it. But if you listen to the song, the drum part is so melodic, it has become the bass part and the drums are the same thing. And I always thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a good point you make, because I do that with all my students as well. I said, I always ask them every week, what are you listening to?
Yeah.
Tell me what you like, because you're gonna turn me on to stuff that I'm totally unaware of.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm old. I'm out of the loop. So they help me just as much as I help them in terms of, check this out, and I'll give them 2 or 3 drummers to check out every week. And hopefully they do the homework. I mean, it's certainly a lot easier now than it was when you and I were coming up.
Oh my gosh, it's so much easier.
I mean, I remember having to go to a library, or I would have friends. Going back to our roots in Rochester. You went to Penfield High School with and studied under Ned Corman.
Yes,
there. Great band director and just wonderful supporter of jazz in general.
Yeah.
And, my wife, Sally, she also went to Penfield.
I didn't know that.
Sally went to Penfield. We both graduated back in 71. We're old. But she also attended one of her friends in school who was a pianist named Barry Kiener, who I'm sure you know.
Of course.
Yeah. And when I was young, when my dad was, in terms of got me hooked up with Vinnie Ruggiero to study, because Vinnie had been playing with Chuck Mangione. There was a concert that Chuck had done prior to the Friends in Love, and I believe it was called Kaleidoscope.
Okay.
And there had been an article in the local paper about Vinnie, and I was looking for a private teacher. So my dad said, "Oh, we should check this out." So he was the one that hooked me up with Vinnie Ruggiero, and Vinnie, in turn, was the one that hooked me up with Barry Kiener.
Oh, cool.
Because he had been playing with Barry. He said, "Man, you should really, get together with Barry. It'd be really good for you." So I'll never forget going over to Barry's house and, him just, turning me on to like all these records and letting me borrow these recordings. And just, the guy was a genius. I mean,
yeah, if people have not heard of Barry Kiener, check him out, because astounding piano player that most well known for playing with Buddy Rich.
Yeah, but mostly known for playing with Buddy. I mean, I played in trios with him. My wife actually sang with him, many times. And, like I said, he was a really generous guy, super talented. He could play anything. He played drums, he played bass, he played trumpet. But the whole thing about him was he was really, a student of the music. He played classical. He played everything. And if people want to check him out, there was a release about, I want to say 18 months ago, that came out, the Buddy Rich Trios album. And it's all live stuff with Barry and Buddy. And it was recorded live on gigs. And I think most of this recording, Buddy plays brushes on, and it's brilliant.
Wow. Do you remember your first drum gig ever?
Yes, as a matter of fact. I mean, outside of school gigs, right? I remember every year there would be, probably just as you were in high school, you would have student teachers that would come in for various subjects, right?
Yeah.
And in the music department, we would get some student teachers. One year we had a great trumpet player, Vinnie DiMartino, that came in and spent like half the year with us. And the other time, I remember there was a guy who was funny, because I still play gigs with him from now and again, a piano player named Fred DeCesar, who was studying at Eastman to get his degree. And he hired me, I think I was at that point maybe a sophomore or a junior in high school, maybe. It was like a Saturday afternoon. It was either a wedding or a bar mitzvah. I can't even remember what it was, at like a VFW lodge place. But I'll never forget that he had enough confidence in me to hire me for this gig.
Wow.
And I remember one of the tunes that we played that I wasn't familiar with at the time was a tune by Oliver Nelson called Stolen Moments.
Oh, yeah, of course.
the original recording on Blues in the Abstract Truth with the great Roy Haynes on drums. And I'll never forget that. And every once in a while, he'll call me to play a duo gig where we're playing for dancing, like ballroom dancers, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he plays left hand and he sings. But and he's a great guy. I mean, he's not really what I would consider a straight ahead jazz player.
Yeah.
But I enjoy playing with him simply because we're there to as a functional duo to facilitate people dancing, right?
Right.
So things have to be within a certain tempo range, I would estimate, for particular types of dance, whether it's Latin or whatever. And to me, I always look at it like problem solving in a way. In other words, what do I have to do or not do to really make this happen and make it feel good?
Right.
And a lot of times what I find is, even though there's just two of us, you would think you have to play more.
Right.
But sometimes I find what works the best is if I actually play less.
Of course.
And I know that sometimes that can sound counterintuitive to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because they think, well, if there's only two of us, we got to fill this space up. But sometimes, without space, there's no rhythm, right?
Yeah.
Because, rhythm is really determined by the spaces in between the notes that we play, not the notes that we play. It's the spaces in between. So, sometimes you just have to, in some ways, what works best is to simplify what you're playing, rather than trying to overly complicate it to make up for what you want to or think you should be hearing in the music.
I often tell my students that when I'm going through all the names of all the drums in the drum set, I say the snare drum's the most important. They say, why? And I go, because you're showing everybody where to clap. I said, when you play a show, there's probably not going to be a lot of drummers out there. And the rest of the people, your job is to play for the song, show everybody where the tempo is so they can dance along and just serve the song.
Exactly.
And I think that's why I like Bill Bruford so much. He leaves these huge gaps. It's a crazy example, but the King Crimson song, Indiscipline, where Tony Levin is, I don't know how he does it. He's keeping that ostinato going while Bill solos. Yeah. But Bill often puts huge holes in it that sometimes you're wondering if he's going to come back on one. Right. Or you're saying, where is one?
Well, that's always great when, I always, I love hearing great drummers that can play great drum solos. I'm not one of those people.
Yeah.
But I always loved the idea. And I remember one time I saw Tony Williams with Lifetime, where the band would vamp while he soloed, rather than just an unaccompanied drum solo. We're soloing. Obviously, jazz drummers, we learn to, again, from the melody, learning to solo over the form of the song.
Right.
In fact, the master class I went to with Carl Allen, he was very adept at talking about that and showing, how you can, use the elements of the drum set to convey those kind of ideas.
Right.
And, talking about, using different colors, and different symbols and so forth.
Right, you're making me think of that one of the first drum videos, the Elvin Jones one, when he's talking about how he has synesthesia and he bashes the cymbal and he goes, "I see green here."
Right. In fact, Carl brought up that exact same video when he was talking about it. He said the different drummer, I have it on VHS here somewhere.
Same. You can see it on YouTube though now. It's all chopped up into little sections.
Yeah, it's great.
Here's a fun question. So you had the red sparkle snare drum and you had your cymbal, which was actually a lamp. After that, what was your first drum set and where did you buy it?
Okay, my first drum set was a set of round badge Gretsch, which unfortunately I don't have anymore. I have pictures of them up here in my studio. It was burgundy sparkle. And the initial set, it was a chrome snare drum, not a wood snare drum.
Right.
8 by 12, 14 by 20. Okay. No floor tom initially. Just 3 drums,
Yep.
a K ride cymbal, and K hi-hats.
Ooh, back then, you were really hip way back then with K.
I know. Yeah, and and I still have a lot of the old catalogs from those days.
Oh man!
And it's just fun to go through and look at the items and look at the prices of some of the things. And you think about it today, it's crazy to think about that. Eventually, I did get a 16-inch floor tom with that kit. And I believe we purchased it at the old Duke Spinners Music on Dewey Avenue.
Yep.
In Driving Park is where it was
great
located.
store. Yeah.
Yeah, but I also remember going a lot to Benson's Music on Hudson Avenue. They always had a lot of good K cymbals and Gretsch drums and stuff there.
Yeah, I bought my first drum set from Musette. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
A little bit more known for their sheet music, but then as I got older, Music Lovers, I remember was a big deal.
When I was in high school, I studied a bit with Bill Cahn at the Eastman, at the preparatory department.
He's awesome.
Because I needed some help at that point because I was I had to send in an audition tape senior year for North Texas State University, which is now called the University of North Texas.
Okay.
So he was kind of helping me. I was going through a snare drum book by a percussionist named Anthony Cerrone and just kind of trying to find some audition pieces that I could record for my school audition.
Right.
But I remember in those days, across from where there was a Duke Spinners, across from the Eastman School,
right,
kitty corner across, there was a music store there, a big 2-level music store. I think it was called Levis Music, Ledis, if I remember. And I remember walking there, man, and just looking up, and they had, the latest, beautiful Ludwig set, or set of Rogers, or you look at these things, and I remember. Like when you're a kid, man, you just can't imagine having something like that, Yeah. And it was really a cool time. But I have a lot of those catalogs from those days, and it's fun to go back and look at those.
Yeah, I remember when I got older, I started shopping at, for people that don't know, there's still a store in Rochester called the House of Guitars.
Oh, yeah.
And I eventually,
House of Guitars.
I eventually ended up working there on the drum floor. And it was exciting, I got to be honest, to not only sell the drums and get to know all the companies and try everything out, but I was bringing up in a recent interview with our friend John McNeil how when I got there, there was this gigantic pile of hardware in the back of the room. And it took me about 2 years to go through that and organize it and put it all in the right place. But people used to enjoy diving into the pile and, finding that weird tom mount from like a 1976, Ludwig kit.
Oh my God. Yeah. So disorganized. It was great.
Not when I was there. But anyway, tell me about your band with your wife, Sally, called Backseat Sally. When did you have that band? How long were you around? And did you guys have a video on MTV?
Yes, we did have a video on MTV. We started Backseat Sally. Sally had been on the road for a couple of years with what was called, back in those days, a show group called the Apple Band. And we would travel up and down the East Coast and go out to the Midwest, and you'd play 1 or 2 weeks at, say, a Marriott or, a Radisson or something like that. And we would play 6 nights a week.
Wow.
In those days, 6 nights a week.
Wow.
So when we got tired of living out of a suitcase and wanted to do, something a little more original, so we came back to Rochester and started, gigging around Rochester. And at some point, up because we wanted to do something original. A friend of ours hooked us up with a pianist that I still play with today, named Casey Filiacci.
Yep.
And Casey had just gotten back. He's been studying at Berkeley. I think he had been doing a cruise ship gig for a little while. And when he got back, he started doing studio work at a recording studio here in Rochester called PCI.
I remember PCI.
PCI was over Atlantic Avenue near East High School. And anyway, he was working for a former disc jockey in Rochester, a guy named Ferdinand Smith. And he had a company called J Advertising, and they did a lot of jingles and eventually doing soundtrack work, stuff for NBC Sports. So we were going to put this band together with Casey, an original band. And again, this was around, I want to say 79, 1980, somewhere in there. Okay. So through this group that we put together, and we started recording demos at PCI, and the owner of the studio was nice enough. They gave us what was, back in the day, what was called spec time.
Yeah.
So it was speculative. So they would let us come into the studio, let's say, after hours or on an Easter Sunday, or, some day that nobody else wanted the time.
Right.
And they would let us record. We covered the cost of, the 24-track tape itself, which, of course, because there was no digital back in those days, we were recording all analog. So, we recorded a lot of demos there for this group. And eventually we started trying to, secure a record deal. And of course, just like anybody else, got rejected by every company we could possibly do. And again, these days, there's no digital, so you're literally sending, cassette tapes, to record companies and getting the rejection letters. So, we weren't, we were in it for the long haul. So we kept sending these tapes out, and we kept trying to think of, original, kind of unique ways to try to get noticed. Because how many tapes do you think every company gets, a week? It had to be astounding. So we came up with this idea where we got, the heart-shaped candy boxes that they sell for like Valentine's Day. So we got a bunch of those empty ones, right? So we took the cassette, we put it in the heart-shaped box, but we literally had chained it with small chains inside the box. So it was physically attached. So they had to remove the chains to get the cassette out of the box. This actually worked. Okay, so we get a call from New York from a woman who worked for a company called Swan Song Records.
Yeah.
Okay, now she said, and Swan Song was actually a subsidiary of Atlantic Records that was actually given to Led Zeppelin. It was their label.
Whoa.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they were signing groups and putting out groups on their own label. So this girl worked for them, and she said, I love your tape, love the music, but the only problem is like we only sign groups from England.
Oh.
They weren't signing anyone from America. Okay, so so the guy that she was working for was a lawyer named Steve Weiss, who was Led Zeppelin's lawyer.
Right.
Okay. So apparently one day he comes into the office, she's playing our stuff, in the office.
Yeah.
He goes, what's that? He goes, oh, it's this group from Rochester, New York. He goes, wow, I really like this. Why didn't you bring this to me? He goes, well, I thought, we only signed English groups. He goes, well, we're probably going to be expanding. And that's how he got interested in us, got us a showcase in front of the president of Atlantic Records in New York. No pressure. In those kind of gigs, I don't know if you've ever done one, but it's like we did it at a place called SIR, Studio Instrument Rentals in New York, very famous.
Yeah, we have one out here too.
Yeah, yep, they're everywhere. And so you're playing, and it's in a dark room. You're on a stage. There's basically like 2 or 3 people in suits sitting on a couch, and you can't see them. They're in the back, and you're trying to, put on a performance, know. And of course, they liked us. Okay, we want to sign you. Well, at that point, your problems are just beginning. You think your problems will be over, but again, it was a number of factors because when the lawyers get involved, this process is going to take like 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
If not longer to, go back and forth with the contract. This time, right around 80, was just at the infancy of MTV.
Right.
Okay, so at the time they gave us a deal to record in what was in those days what was called an EP.
Yep.
Right, not an LP, but an EP.
Extended play, I remember.
Extended play.
Those are actually coming back now, but go on.
Oh yeah, they're still there. So that was the original intent, and then when they saw how much material that we had that was viable, they changed this and gave us a full album. But they didn't have anything in the budget in those days for video because it was so new. They hadn't even thought of it. But we knew that, we had to figure out a way to get a video done that was a quality video. So they kicked in some money and we ended up having to fund the rest of it ourselves.
Wow.
So I think, and in fact, one of the guy that shot the video was one of the camera guys that shot Woodstock, the movie.
That's cool.
Yeah, and we shot it in a high school gym in somewhere I think in the Bronx or Manhattan. I can't remember exactly where it was. And so we had a video on MTV. Okay, maybe they played it at 2 a.m.
Right.
But we
you still did it
out there. Yeah, and you can find it on YouTube. The group was called Backseat Sally, and of course the song that chose for the video and the first single was the song that we wrote basically because we needed one more song, and we basically wrote it as a joke. You know how that is.
Yeah.
The record company, they're going to pick the dumb. It was like what happened with the Turtles, I think.
Yeah.
They picked the silliest song they could think of. Anyway, it was a song called "Prove It," and it was very heavy kind of tune. We had much better tunes, but in any event, that's the one that they chose. So that's the one that we did the video on. And and you can find it on YouTube if you look hard enough.
Now, I forgot to ask you, who was in the band?
Jeff Gilhart was on guitar. Casey was on keyboards, and Casey and my wife Sally were the main writers in the band. They co-wrote everything that we did. We originally had a different bass player and a different guitar player. Actually, Ethan Porter played with us initially.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah,
he's a great guitar player too.
A great guitar player, great guy, great guitar player. And we had a different bass player at the time, but eventually it was Jeff Gilhart, who had gone to school with Casey, and we had worked with a bass player named Gary Cummings, who was the other member of the group.
Wow. Now, who came up with the name? I never asked you that. Like, where did you guys get that name?
Well, I think the name actually came from a high school friend of mine who was actually producing and engineering our sessions. It was a guy named Todd Schaefer. It was one of the studio engineers at PCI. And Todd had been a trumpet player in my high school jazz band. And then went on to do a lot of recording sessions. One interesting story, if I can tell you real quick.
Yeah.
Okay. In my high school, I went to school at Russia and Henrietta. You went to Penfield.
Yep.
My senior year, we were one of 10 high school bands around the country that got selected through a competition to play at the Montreux Jazz Festival in Switzerland.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, it was. So we raised all this money and we did this whole tour of Europe. We went to London, we went to Paris, played Scotland, and eventually the last stop was going to be playing at the Montreux Jazz Festival. And this relates to a little bit of like kind of Spinal Tap and Tony Levin Road Stories, which are like Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we were traveling by train, and it's all 10 bands together, right? We're on this train. We're traveling from Paris to go to Montreux, Switzerland. And, we're moving about all the different cars, we're hanging out, whatever, big train. So as the train goes along, we're making stops at various places. People are getting on and off, right?
Yeah.
So we get to one stop, and it seemed like, man, we're at this stop for a really long time. And we were in the back car, and I think you know what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
But we look out the window, and somebody said, guys, the rest of the train is gone. So they uncoupled our car.
Oh, no.
and the rest of the train was gone. They're going to hook up our car to a different engine, which turns out is going to Italy instead of Switzerland.
Uh-oh.
And as it turns out, there were like 10 of us in this car. There were no adults, no teachers, no band directors, no chaperones. And our passports and all our personal belongings were on the part of the train that had already left.
Oh, boy.
So to make a long story even longer, they said, well, we can only let you go this far. We can't let you go to the border here in Italy. They won't let you across. So fortunately, one of the kids who was with us spoke enough French to figure out that we were going to hire like 2 or 3 taxi cabs to take us from where we were to Montreux.
Wow.
And we were able to, fortunately, we pulled all our money, whatever we had, and we were able to do this and get there just in time to get there after dinner started. And of course, they were all up in arms about this. There was no cell phones in those days, nothing. They had no idea where we were. But we managed to get there and do it. Of course, they were very upset with us. But so here's the last interesting part about this story. Okay, after going through all this, we play at Montreux. I meet some great friends there that I'm still friends with today from some other bands in California. Anyway. The stage that we're playing on, Montreux Jazz Festival.
Yeah.
6 months later, that place burned to the ground.
Whoa.
Which has been immortalized in a song by Deep Purple called "Smoke on the Water."
Of course. I just taught that to some 4th graders.
Yeah.
And they're like, what is this song about?
Yeah, I know. It's Frank Zappa is in the song. In fact, I have two copies of the same picture of us playing in that room. And then, 6 months later, it was gone.
Wow. You got to send that to me. I would love to see that.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
When you put that extra song, the joke song that became your hit, I've heard that a lot before. I'll never forget reading the article about Lenny Kravitz where he's putting an album out and he was playing some of it for his friend driving in the car, and one of the songs was "Fly Away." And his friend was like, "What's this?" And he goes, I was just screwing around. This is probably not going to be on the album." And that turned out to be the #1 hit.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, the other one is when Sting made "Nothing Like the Sun," which I love. Beautiful album. He had it almost all done. He played it for his manager, Miles Copeland. He's like, "This is really great and artistic, but you need a hit." And apparently Sting spent about 10, 15 minutes and wrote "We'll Be Together." That also was a #1 hit.
Yeah.
So you never know what songs are going to hit with people, right?
No, you really don't. And if, I don't know, to me, if you try to manufacture that, it's not going to be right.
Never going to work.
No. I mean, honestly, man, I don't understand, today when you see on the Grammy Awards or whatever, these shows and you look at, this song and like, how many people did it take to write this?
Oh, yeah.
It's like they got 15 writers on one song.
Yeah, that's a big thing, especially with K-pop now too. I know K-pop really well because my younger students are into it, and they have a team of writers. I just thought of another one. My friend Donnie Wynn, who was Robert Palmer's drummer for 25 years, he was telling me how this is going to come out in his book that he's writing. So they recorded the album Heavy Nova. And at that point, Simply Irresistible was really different and a lot slower. And they had finished the album, and then Donnie was about to get on the plane, and something was bothering him. And so he turns around the taxi, goes back, knocks on Robert Palmer's door and said, "We got to recut that." And now we have the really, vicious version of it, the super funky and up-tempo.
Yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah, you never know. And oddly... My wife and I were watching the season premiere of Slow Horses last night, and they used that song, and I'm like, wow. What a difference that Donnie made that they re-recorded this, because that song might not have been the timeless hit that it is.
Exactly.
Tell me about your current band, Primetime Funk. My first
Okay.
question is, who started the band? Because I actually don't know.
Okay, the band was started back in 1996, so we're almost next year will be 30 years.
Wow.
By my good friend Jim Richmond, vocalist and saxophone player, and the late Ralph Ortiz, who played bass in the band.
Remember Ralph.
Yeah, Ralph was just so special, and I'll never forget the first time I heard him. He was playing with a group called Saratoga. In fact, that night that I heard him, Steve Gadd was sitting in on drums on a few tunes.
Oh man,
this is back at the old Glass Onion.
Yeah, I remember that
on
place.
Marshall Street. Yeah, and I'll never forget. The great Nancy Kelly was singing in the band at the time, and they were doing a version of Chucky's in Love by Ricky Lee Jones, which of course
a little bit of a challenging song.
Yeah, and it has a very famous Steve Gadd lick in it.
Yeah.
And it was very funny because Steve played it. He played it great. It got to that point in the tune, he didn't know what to do, because that was one of 8 gazillion sessions he had played that year.
Of course.
And it just made everybody laugh a little bit, because he played something and it was brilliant, but it wasn't that. But I'll never forget that. And somewhere I think, and I got to get this to you, I think I have recordings from that night.
Oh wow. I mean, but I've talked to, we both know Tony Levin and Steve Gadd, and a lot of times I'll say to Tony, hey, I just got this new Jennifer Knapp album. I love your bass playing on it. And then there's a pause and he goes, Malcolm, I'm so sorry. I don't remember doing that. And it doesn't mean that they didn't like it or enjoy it. These guys did so many sessions.
So much.
Ridiculous. Yep. I mean, people like J.R. Robinson, it's hard to fathom how many movie soundtracks, jingles, albums. I mean, their workload was ridiculous. And I've heard that story, how apparently Rick Marotta had to carry Steve from one session to another because he was just going all day and all night.
And that's what, when I was coming up in the 80s and getting my, cutting my teeth in the recording studio, always wanted to emulate those guys, whether it was Steve or Rick or JR. Those were the cats, or Jeff Porcaro, all those cats were the guys that, we all looked up to and, kind of wanted to be, because there was no way, I mean, I love Buddy Rich. He was one of my first inspirations in terms of jazz drummers, after, of course, being turned on to music by, the Beatles and the Stones. But I always knew in the back of my mind, there's no way I could ever approach that. I don't care how much practicing I would do, So, the idea for me of it became much more interesting of being in a group and really playing for the song. Yeah. And being able to sort of be, a chameleon in a way. Be able to kind of play, any style that was required and be able to do it in an authentic way, in an honest way. Yeah. And just to give the producer or the artist what they wanted, instead of what maybe I thought that they needed.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a big difference there.
Yeah, and be yourself too. This week I've been refreshing and looking at primetime funk videos. There's 3 songs that jumped out to me. First of all, I love your version of Bill Withers' "Use Me," especially the intro, the very percussive intro. That one's really cool.
That was an early one where we were doing some cover tunes in addition to the original. I said, well, we can't just cover it like the record. We got to do something a little different.
Yeah. Yeah, and also you did the same thing with your version of Uptown Funk, the Mark Ronson, Bruno Mars. You guys took the arrangement way out there. It was really cool.
Well, I have to give credit where credit is due. That is not our specific arrangement. That arrangement was from a guy, the late Tim Akers is his name. Yeah. I believe he's from Nashville, and he had a group called the Smokin' Section. Right. And that's actually his arrangement of that piece. But yeah, people freak out when they hear that version of it. Although we had to do at the most recent Rochester Music Hall of Fame show last April, we had to do the standard version of it because we were playing with backing up Bruno Mars' musical director, John Fawcett, who's from Rochester.
Well, and then the other one that really blew me away, I forgot about this. 5 years ago during COVID, you guys did What You Gonna Do. Now, did you guys write that song?
Yeah, that's an original. Our trumpet player, one of our trumpet players, rather, Derek Lip, wrote the music. Jim Richmond wrote the lyrics. Yeah, and
that's a great song.
We did. Yeah, it is a great song, and it's very relevant. It's funny. Some of the lyrics, when we were first writing it, eventually got changed a little bit because in between writing it and recording it, I think Katrina had happened back in the day. Yeah. And, there was just certain things that were going on, but as we all know, these things are still going on. So, that was a really fun tune to record. And it was one that we wanted to do something during the pandemic. Everybody was recording at home.
How did you put that together? What went down first? The vocals, the drums, and who edited it and put it together? Because it's really slick.
Yeah. Well, the guy who edited it and put it all together was our keyboard player, Andy Calabrese. In fact, we recorded the whole album that's from. We recorded it at his studio mostly. And so I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think I laid the drums down first. And, I did it with a click. In fact, I recorded it here at home just using, believe it or not, a Yamaha EAD-10 to record the drums, 2-track.
Oh, yeah, I saw in the video, you can see it. But, I mean, how did you play the song without hearing the music? Did you memorize it, or were you listening to something?
Well, I had played the song enough. I had memorized the song, so I was just able to play it along with a click. I don't think I played it, along with any kind of a track. I think I just basically sang the song to myself and just played through it, and and was just recording the video on my iPhone at the time. Now, it probably took a couple of takes for me to get one decent take.
Yeah.
But that's what we used, and then once that was distributed, everybody just put their own parts on individually, and then Andy put it all together at his studio and edited it all together and mixed it.
Wow.
And he did a really great job. Just like with anything, it's a learning curve, as you go through it. So you get better at it the more that you do it.
Yeah, it's really amazing, and I encourage people to check it out.
And, thanks, man.
It looks like you're playing live, but I remember back then how difficult it was to perform or for me to teach online because of the latency problems. That was a nightmare.
Yes. Yeah. There was no way. Yeah, that was very difficult. Yeah. So, we avoided that because there was just no way to do it. And we couldn't all be in the same room to do it. So, that's the way we did it. But, so that band, we're coming up on 30 years with that band. We've had a number of personnel changes over the years.
Right.
The band, we don't play as often as we used to.
Yeah.
And so, which is fine with me, honestly, because, it seems like everything right now is like tribute bands.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, some of them are fine, but, some of it borders on, being an Elvis impersonator, in my opinion. So we kind of pick and choose where we play. And plus with 10 guys, it's like trying to get the planets to align sometimes.
Oh my God. I even tell my students,
let alone rehearsal.
I tell my students, I was like, be like the White Stripes or 21 Pilots, just two or three people.
Yeah. That's why this other group that I've been playing with, actually the formed during the pandemic called CMD.
Yeah.
It's a trio. It's myself, Casey Filiacci, who was the composer and keyboard player in Backseat Sally, and a great bass player named Mark Terranova, who also plays in Primetime Funk now.
Yep.
But it's just so fun because there's only three of us. In fact, we're getting together tonight because we've got a new CD that's going to be coming out, God willing, before the holidays. It's holiday theme CD, but it's not your traditional Christmas music.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not Jingle Bells or Santa Claus is Coming to Town or any of those things. I mean, this record is vastly different from the first two that we did. The first one's called Just a Song.
Okay.
And the second one's called Just Another Song. And on both of those recordings, we basically took pop and rock classic tunes and did them with a piano, bass, drums trio.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't describe it, although we play a little bit of straight ahead swing jazz, it's not really that kind of thing. It's more groove oriented. So we did everything from songs by Fleetwood Mac, Peter Gabriel, Joni Mitchell, Foreigner, Journey, things, the Eagles, things like that, and just totally rearranged them in a lot of cases. So, people might not recognize it at first, but eventually they'll figure out what we're playing. But for this new one that's coming out, that's being mixed right now, like I said, it's a holiday themed CD, but it's more about, coming home. So a lot of the music that we're using is very, dates back hundreds of years.
Well, it's kind of like that Sting Winter album. That's cool.
Exactly. It's very much like that. So, in fact, on a lot, I played traditional drums on a number of the cuts, but on a lot of this particular project, I'm playing a set of Taos drums.
Ooh, I was going to ask you about those. I love those drums.
I do too. And they work so well for this particular project, man. I'm excited for you to hear it.
Tell everybody really quickly, because the company's not around anymore. And
I know.
I mean, back in the 90s, I remember Ash Sood played them, Jerry Marotta, Mick Fleetwood. Yeah. But describe to everybody what these Flintstones drums are like.
That's a good way to look at it. Well, basically, they're Native American drums. They were made by a company called the Taos Drum Company, Taos, in Taos, New Mexico.
Yep.
And, and I've been hip to them, but, again, the same sources, particularly Jerry Marotta's use of them with Peter Gabriel. And so I contacted the company and had them make me a kit. I've got something, the bass drum is basically a hollowed out log, it's roughly 20 inches around, but it's not, of course, perfectly around, and it weighs a ton.
Yeah.
I've got a one rack tom and then a floor tom, which are more of a barrel stave construction.
Yeah.
But it's all natural heads on them. The only thing that will tune these drums is heat and humidity.
Yeah.
Or lack of it. And then I had them make me actually 3 different snare drums that I could use.
Oh, wow. That I didn't know.
Various size. Yeah. So, it takes a special project kind of like this one we're doing now, because you need, for these drums to really work effectively, although I have overdubbed them on my previous Primetime Funk CD for one tune.
Yeah.
But generally, it requires a lot of space in the music.
Yeah.
For these drums to really translate.
Because they resonate so much, too.
They resonate, exactly. It might be a similar sound in some ways to, there's a track or two where I've just played the traditional drum set with the snares off, just playing with my hands.
Yeah.
But these are really special. And as a matter of fact, if you remember, I think you were instrumental in getting Jerry Marotta over here to my place because he signed my floor tom on my Taos set.
I think he was touring with the great Chapman stick player Tom Graysgraber, right? When they had the duo.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and they were playing downtown, and I remember going there and seeing him with the garden weasel. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it was great. In fact, I've got a picture up here in my studio of him playing on the drum or on a cocktail set. I can't remember which, but he was kind enough to sign my floor tom for me. And I think actually, weren't you also instrumental in getting Bill Bruford here one day?
No, I wish, but
No?
I'm guessing that's when he played at Eastman Place with Earthworks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I actually did
Yeah.
get to talk to him and hang out with him that night, but I didn't bring him over.
Oh, okay. I can't remember who the promoter was, but I think that was
it was probably Robert Fraza, who was his roadie, manager. He was doing everything for him, but it could have been somebody through Eastman.
Yeah, I can't recall, but what I do recall, I think part of it was the fact that this promoter probably contacted my wife, Sally, because at the time she was a arts and entertainment reporter for the local cable news, Time Warner Cable at the time.
Yeah, she was a great journalist.
Yeah, and she wanted to, was just going to do an interview with Bill. And she said, well, I'd really like to get you around some drums. Would you mind coming to my house and hanging out in my husband's studio? So he was here for, I want to say, 3 or 4 hours.
Oh, my God.
Hanging out. And
I wish I was there.
Somewhere. Yeah, well, you know what he's like. He's like the professor. It was just great. And, he signed a drum head for me, of course. And somewhere I've got to find there. I do have a picture of him playing a set of Fibes drums here. I think it was a Jelly Bean set of clear, different colored drums.
Wow.
But that was a real thrill to have him, just to meet him, man. It was
he's amazing.
Really. Yeah, just amazing. Yeah, and the performance that night was incredible.
So inspiring, and I'm so glad that he came out of retirement and is playing with that new trio.
I know.
That's so cool. And actually, back to what you were saying, like playing an ostinato and soloing over, I'll never forget everybody in the audience clapping. And while we were clapping and keeping the beat, he soloed over that.
Yeah. I've seen Steve do that, too.
Oh, yeah. So your band that you're playing with tonight, you guys did a Peter Gabriel cover. I'm curious. I was just listening to Herbie Hancock's version of Mercy Street, which if you haven't heard is really beautiful.
Oh,
what song do you guys do?
Well, that's the same one that we do, but we do it much closer, I would say, to tempo and mood of the original.
Yeah.
So it's not up tempo like Herbie's is. Although we did try it that way. And that's the thing about this trio is that when we approach a tune, we don't really necessarily at first have a particular style or arrangement, in mind. So we try these things various ways and a lot of it comes down to just finding the right groove.
Yeah.
First.
For those particular players.
Yeah, exactly. For us as players and also for what seems to work, best with the song because, sometimes, it kind of keeps it in the same realm, but most of the time we end up doing things quite differently. Like, for example, we do Rhiannon by Fleetwood Mac, but we do it in 3 rather than in 4. And I think the same thing holds true. We do a version of Foreigners, Waiting for a Girl Like You.
Yeah. Another Rochester band.
Yes, another Rochester connection, Lou Graham. So we do that in 3 rather than in 4. So, it's things like that. Or we do a version of, if you remember, the old tune by Sugarloaf called Green Eyed Lady.
Of course.
Yeah, but we do that as a reggae tune. So we try to come up with, different ways to arrange these tunes or disguise them in a way, but still works with the song. I mean, we're not trying to fool anybody, but It's just funny to see people reaction when they actually realize what it is that we're playing.
Yeah, the whole element of surprise, and you're making. Remember that band Dred Zeppelin? You're making me think of them.
Oh yeah, I love those guys. Yeah, they're incredible.
Why don't we do this? Name all the current members of Primetime Funk, because I haven't been back to Rochester in a couple of years.
Okay, so I guess at this point, Jim Richmond and myself are the only original members still left.
Yeah.
So the other members, we got Mark Terranova on bass. We've got Joe Chapone on guitar. who goes back a long way with us. Andy Calabrese on keyboards. The horn section is Ron D'Angelo and Derek Lip on the trumpets. We've got Mike Edwards on tenor saxophone, Dean Keller on baritone saxophone, and again, Jim Richmond on tenor saxophone. And right now, we're actually in the process of auditioning some new vocalists.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So right now, I'm not going to say too much about that aspect of it because
it's top secret.
Still sort of, well, it's not. It's in flux. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But we've got some great people, and we've been very fortunate over the years because any band that's been together almost 30 years, that's a hard thing to keep going,
Yeah.
especially if you're doing some original music, which these days is even tougher, I think. But we've been fortunate in that since 2012, we've been the house band for the Rochester Music Hall of Fame.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that was my next question.
Oh,
can you
good.
tell everybody what that is and what you have to do with it?
Okay. So this was an organization that, it was basically put together by volunteers back probably, I think the first inkling of it was probably around 2010 or so. But anyway, they started in 2012 and they have an annual ceremony concert that they do at the Kodak Hall Eastman Theater.
Yep.
Okay. And Jim Richmond, who's one of the founders of Primetime Funk, he's on one of the committee members of the board of directors for the Hall of Fame in Rochester. So as you can imagine, being on a board of something like that is a thankless task. Because you can never make everybody happy.
Steve Chubata's, is he on the board too?
Yeah. Yes, Steve is on the board as well. I know Steve very well. I see him every year. So in any event, they've designated us, fortunately, we're the house band. So we back whatever the artists who may be coming in, being honored by the Hall of Fame in terms of being inducted, or they could be coming in to honor one of the inductees. So
that sounds really exciting.
It really is, and for us, I don't want to sound blow our own horn so much, but there's not a lot of bands around that could probably cover the breadth and the width of the genres of material that we have to deal with.
No, I totally believe that.
And sometimes under, less than ideal circumstances or, very rushed circumstances. Because, but over the years, we look at the number of artists that we've gotten to back and play with. I'm looking at a list here, and it's crazy. Everybody from, of course, Lou Gramm.
Yep.
And back in 2018, we inducted, finally got to get Steve, Gadd, and Tony Levin here to induct them.
Yeah.
And Paul Simon came and surprised everybody and performed with Steve and Tony.
So cool.
And they were performing with Mike Maneri and Steps Ahead.
Wow.
At the time, which was amazing. And I got to tell you this just as an aside. As a drummer, you'll understand this, and most of your listeners probably will as well. We all know the famous Paul Simon, Steve Gadd beat 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover.
Of course,
right?
Every drummer needs to learn that.
Exactly. I teach it to all my students, and we've all had to play it. Well, I was going to have to play that in front of Steve.
Oh, no.
Okay.
No pressure. No pressure.
No pressure. Okay. And I've played, Steve's been in the audience when I've played before, but having to play something like that, I'm just thinking if you screw it up, you have to move to another planet and change your name. Because now with the internet, everybody's going to see that you screw this up, right? So fortunately, about a week before the show, we got word, Paul Simon is definitely coming, and they want to play 50 Ways in their set. And I'm like, thank God. So I didn't have to play it in front of Steve. Unfortunately, the horn section got to late in the evening with them, which was a lot of fun.
Oh, love that song.
Yeah. Yeah, so at that show, I only had to play a version of Sledgehammer in front of Tony Levin. But at least I wasn't playing bass. So, But I look at some of the people. I'm looking at this list of people, and it's like Gary Wright, who did Dreamweaver.
Yeah.
I got to play double drums with Carmen Apice.
Wow.
Carmen Apice. Yeah, which was a thrill. It was both him and his brother Vinnie were here one year. We played with the great vibraphonist Joe Locke from Rochester,
man.
who you may remember.
Love
Joe's
his
monster
playing.
player. Love his playing.
Yeah.
We got to play with John Hall from Orleans. We played one year with David Clayton Thomas and Paul Schaefer to honor Lou Sola. And I'll tell you what, man, one year they inducted Pee Wee Ellis, who's from Rochester.
Of course, from James Brown.
James Brown. So not only did they bring Pee Wee in, we brought in Fred Wesley, Maceo Parker, and Christian McBride on bass. Man.
Dude, right there, you're blowing my mind with just that one gig.
It was unbelievable, man. I'm sitting there, and these guys are playing, and we're playing, everything from a straight ahead tune to classic James Brown stuff, and I'm playing with Christian McBride, one, and then you're hearing that iconic horn section. And, it's like one of those pinch yourself moments, man. You can't believe you're playing with these guys.
Man, I love that Christian McBride, that band he had with Questlove, the Philadelphia Experiment.
Yeah.
I always play that for my students. I was like, these are real people playing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So when is the next one? And do you know who the guest stars are going to be?
Well, the next one is at the end of next April. I know that. I have the dates already in my calendar. In terms of who they're going to honor, at this point, I have no idea. I get information here and there, but then again, sometimes things fall through because certain people aren't available, or things don't turn out, the way you think they will. I mean, a few years ago, one of the artists that was coming in that we had to back was Steve Stevens from Billy Idol's band. Great guitarist.
Great guitar player.
Fabulous. And he's done records with Terry Bozzio and Tony.
Remember the band he had, Bozzio, Levin, Stevens?
Yeah.
Is so cool if people haven't heard that, especially when Steve Stevens does the flamenco parts. And then Terry Bozzio is, of course, tuning all his drums and half steps and playing along. Yeah. It's so wild.
Yeah, it's wild. But I'll never forget, because a lot of times leading up to these things, you're trying to get information from the artists, or they're usually from their management, about what songs they want to do. Because we got to, prepare all this stuff before they get there. Of course. Because we have very limited time, sometimes just at sound check, to rehearse the songs with them.
Yikes.
Okay. So the whole time, they said, okay, Steve wants to do these songs. And he said, but he doesn't want any vocals. I'm thinking, well, how are we going to do Billy Idol's Rebel Yell without vocals? Yeah. No, I understand. Like, he wrote the theme song or co-wrote it for the original Top Gun movie.
Oh, I didn't know
that. So that was one of the pieces we were going to play, which was strictly an instrumental, so I could get that. Yeah. So we kept checking, Jim Richmond kept checking with the management guy. Oh, no, he doesn't like working with local singers, this and that. So, okay, well, we got a couple of guys that could nail this stuff, right? Yeah. So as usual, because you're not dealing with the artists themselves, you just don't know what's going to happen. They turn out to be very, easy to work with, and Steve was no exception. But I'll never forget, he's plugging in his pedal board. We're getting ready to start the rehearsal, and he looks up at Jim Richmond and says, "Where's the singer?"
After all that.
After all that, and fortunately, we had a guy that could do it, and and everything went great, and he was thrilled, but you just never know, what's going to happen. So and again, we played, we backed other, rock guys like Randy Bachman from Bachman Turner Overdrive, and Guess Who, Pat Travers. We played with Boom Boom Out Go the Lights. We got to play with Joan Osborne, which was a thrill a few years ago.
Amazing.
Yeah, yeah. So it's been a lot, really different stuff, everything from like the stylistics to the cow sills to, every style imaginable from, Broadway to, big band stuff. So I look at it as a challenge every year
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and it's really satisfying when you can support these great artists in a way that they feel comfortable.
Yeah. Wow. I hope I get to make it out there to see one of those someday.
Yeah. There's been some just great performances, and I'm really very fortunate to have gotten to play on these shows and back a lot of these people, and it's always a challenge, that's for sure.
Tell me about a singer that you like who also happens to be a great drummer. The first two that come to mind for me are Stevie Wonder and Paul McCartney. Can you think of a singer that you like that is also good on the drums?
Well, maybe Phil Collins, of course, comes to mind.
Yep.
Um,
Well,
but
you
I'm
can
sure
do
there's
you can do the other way around too. I mean, I recently
okay.
saw a great video of Buddy Rich singing.
There you go. Yeah, in fact, I've got an album cover up on my wall here in my studio. It's a Buddy Rich album called "The Voice Is Rich." Buddy Rich sings. And so Sanders, and it's got two pictures of him on the cover crooning.
Yeah, I often tell my students that a lot of people like Buddy Rich back then, they came from vaudeville. So you had
Yes,
to
they
be
were entertainers.
you had to be a comedian, you had to be a dancer, you had to be a singer, and then you can play your instrument. And if you look back at these people like Mel Torme, you'd just be astounded at all the things they can do.
Yeah. Or I mean, one of the greatest entertainers that have kids go back and look at Sammy Davis Jr.
Great drummer.
Great drummer, great everything. Like you said, they had to be entertainers.
Richard Pryor too.
Yeah, I mean, and of course Steve Gadd was a tap dancer.
Oh, yeah,
so
that's where
the
whole heel toe method comes from that.
Exactly. And I mean, I'm not a dancer, but I've gotten to tech for Steve a couple of times in the studio and gotten to sit behind him while he's recording and just learning, what a lesson, to just watch him and just see his creative process, because I think that when he's working on material, he does working with a songwriter, for example, he's not going to sit down with the drums right away.
Right. He wants to hear the song.
He wants to hear the song, and then it's like you can kind of see the wheels turning a little bit. But the stuff that he'll come up with, particularly his brushwork, is just astounding.
Oh my God. There's nobody. This is going to sound weird, but I think of Cubist painters when I hear him play brushes. It's almost like eagle's wings. I mean, there's just something iconic and very unique about the way he plays brushes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's one of the cool things I think about brushes in general is that nobody seems to do it the same way.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a different approach. And in fact, I know there was a DVD that Steve Smith and Adam Nussbaum did a few years ago called "The Art of Playing with Brushes," where
I got to check that out.
Like check it out. It's really informative because they have I think 5 or 6, great jazz drummers, besides themselves, who are all playing to the same songs. And you see the different approaches and the different motions.
That is a great concept. Wow.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and you can really see. But your comment about Steve and his brushstrokes in terms of painting, I thought the exact same thing when I sat behind him and got to see that up close.
Yeah, and I'll never forget.
It was very inspiring.
I'll never forget. I was hanging with him. He was playing at Hollywood Bowl. I got to think he's probably playing with James Taylor. And I got to hang out in the green room in the back. And after the first set, Steve comes back and I was like, "Oh my God, you were playing with 2 brushes in each hand. How did you develop that?" And he's like, "Oh, I was just fucking around, Malcolm." I mean, he's like, these things that blow our mind. He's like, "I'm just trying something."
Well, I got to say, because at the Hall of Fame, they played late in the evening, right? And he does that with 2 sticks in each hand.
Yep.
Now, have you tried doing that?
Yeah, I know. I'm never going to try again. It's insane.
It's so hard to hold on to the two sticks. I don't know how he does it. I mean, literally, because there's a couple of bands I'm doing there's like a kind of a musical Paul Simon tribute thing that I'm doing coming up the end of February, and I've played late in the evening, you know, a number of times, but I literally had to tape the sticks together to be able to hold on to them, man. I put, you know, I don't know how he does it. It's just unbelievable.
Well, and it also makes me think of all the marimba players I like Kristen Shiner or Mika Stolzman or Ruth Cahn. How the hell do they hold 3 or 4 sticks in each hand and then play like an arpeggio while they're soloing with the right? That blows my mind.
Yeah.
So every morning when I wake up, I have like about 10 albums that I like to put on to wake up to. And they include like Bright Size Life by Pat Metheny. Mm-hmm. I like Daniel Lanois, Belladonna. And the one I've been listening to lately is I never get bored of the Korea Gadd album, Chinese Butterfly. Mm-hmm. So I put that out there to ask you, what have you had on heavy rotation lately? And I should say for the younger people, heavy streaming.
Heavy streaming. Well, as a matter of fact, that's one of my favorites that I've been listening to a lot.
It gets better over time.
It does, and you know, I was lucky enough to get to see that band play live here in Rochester.
Man.
They played at the Eastman, and it was incredible. You know, just seeing that live and the interplay that those guys had. You know, was really something special. I mean, you know, losing Chick, you know, a few years ago, that just, I don't know, it hit me really hard.
Yeah.
That was, you know, such a loss for the music community. And
agreed.
Just, you know, he was just such a vital, you know, what an amazing genius composer and player. And, you know, of course, the stuff that he did with Steve over the years is just legend, you know, really, it's just amazing.
On a funny note, he's probably one of 2 people that I enjoy watching them on the guitar.
Yeah.
He had the little tiny Yamaha one, and then Herbie Hancock I saw here with an orchestra a few years ago at the Bowl, and he had a gigantic, it looked like it had to be 61 keys at least that he was walking around with. He was playing Rocket with an orchestra.
Yeah.
No, that's out there.
Yeah. No, I saw Herbie a couple of years ago. We saw him at the New Orleans Jazz Fest with Terrence Blanchard was playing with. Was Terrence with him when you saw him? Or was this with the orchestra?
No, it was just him and an orchestra. It was pretty wild.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it was great, man. He's still amazing. It's just still amazing. In terms of, you know, albums, you know, things that I listen to, you know, I go back, man. I'll go back and listen to like, you know, my old, like Consummation by Thad Jones, Mel Lewis.
Yep.
You know, I've been listening to that a lot lately. Also been listening to some Snarky Puppy.
Oh,
lately.
they're amazing.
Yeah, they are amazing. I got to see them about 10 years ago here in Rochester, and they're fabulous. Let's see, what else I've been listening to?
I never get bored of Sketches of Spain. Gil Evans
No,
and Miles Davis.
anything with Miles is great. In fact, I got to see Marcus Miller's band last week, and they were doing a whole bunch of that stuff. Man,
who was playing drums?
A guy named Anwar Marshall. I think he's from Philly. Great drummer. This was kind of special. You know, I don't know if this wasn't really Marcus's regular band, but it was kind of like the guys that have played with him over the years. So he had both Russell Dunn and Sean Jones on trumpet. He had Eric Marienthal on alto. A guy named Tivin Pennicott on tenor saxophone, who plays with Gregory Porter. I don't know if you've heard Gregory Porter.
Mm-mm.
Great vocalist, really amazing vocalist. But in any event, you know, one of the other records that I always go back to, man, is Kind of Blue.
Oh, you can't go wrong with that.
Yeah, and Love Supreme.
Yeah,
and
classics.
And I just and both, you know, In a Silent Way and Bitches Brew.
Oh man, yeah.
You know. and you start naming albums, and it's like, and then of course, the other ones that I love, that always go back to, would be like, stuff with Hymn of the Seventh Galaxy, Return to Forever, which people don't know that, that whole album was recorded with Steve first.
I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, that whole album was, in fact, there's a collection that you can get that has like a couple of live radio cuts that Steve plays on with the original electric Return to Forever with Bill Connors.
I would love to hear that.
And Mingo Lewis on percussion, I believe. But my understanding from what I've read is that they recorded that entire first album with Steve, and then when Steve didn't want to go on the road and stay in New York, that they redid it with Lenny.
Wow.
Yeah, which is amazing. I'd love to hear the original version with Steve. I mean, Lenny killed it, but just to hear the differences in approach would be great. Wow. Oh, one other album that I want to mention with Steve that's just killer, that a lot of people probably don't know about, is an album called Fusion by Michael Urbaniak.
Oh, I love Michael.
Yeah.
No, I know that album.
Polish violinist. I believe Anthony Jackson is on bass on that recording. And that is a spectacular record.
Some of that is on YouTube. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I just wanted to bring up with Tony Williams, because I'm 55, the way I got into Tony Williams is my brother saw Tony live, bought me the album The Joy of Flying. And I think this is around 79, 80. And that's how I got into Tony. So I went backwards. I went from The Joy of Flying to Foreign Intrigue, Civilization. I love the latter Tony Williams, which I know a lot of people don't. They'd rather hear the stuff with Miles. But I like all of it. And I think the tail end of his career was really fascinating. Yeah,
I mean, he was incredible. I only got to see him once with the group Lifetime with Alan Holdsworth.
Wow. I love Alan Holdsworth.
They were playing. Yeah, and it was he had this bass player. I think it was a Motowner guy. Tony Newton was his name, and Alan Pasqua on keyboards.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget. Again, it was one of those cases where the band would vamp while Tony soloed, and I just remember watching the bass player. He was kind of doing that. That thing that Stevie Wonder does where it's kind of like he's a human metronome where it's going back and forth, just trying to keep time, keep it together over what Tony was playing, But my first introduction to Tony was through Vinnie Ruggiero, who, hit me to the Miles Davis album 4 and More.
Yeah. Well, that's classic. That's what everybody goes to.
Well, and the thing was, I don't think, at the time that, he hit me to that was maybe I was, 17 maybe at the time. Of course, Tony was 17 when he played that album.
Yeah.
Okay. When he recorded that.
Yeah.
And I think, in my estimation, it probably took me 5 years to literally really hear and understand what he was playing.
No, I'm still there with you. I'm still some of the stuff I listen and then it clicks.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's crazy. And then you think about, all right, this guy was 17 when he played this.
Yeah. Wait, remember that Miles had to go to his house, ring the doorbell, and ask Tony's mom if he could go on tour with him.
Yeah. I mean, just amazing. And then after that, I remember the first album. Of course, hearing him with Miles. I had those records. But then when he did the double album called Emergency.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just so different than anything.
It's like from another planet. Yeah.
It is totally from another planet. And, aside from, people, didn't like the fact that he sang on the album or whatever it was, but the playing on that between Larry Young and John McLaughlin was just incredible. And, it was kind of a recording where you could literally hear the tubes of the amps humming, or his bass drum pedal squeaking.
I love that, though.
I love that stuff, And that kind of stuff was just so inspirational. And even though you want to go back to, early stuff, but I'll never be able to repay my dad in particular for taking me to see Buddy Rich so many times live.
Yeah.
Like, because he would come and play at that club in Rochester, the top of the plaza. The facade of the place still exists here in Rochester. It was at the 14th floor of Midtown Plaza was where it was.
Okay.
Okay. So, but Buddy would come. Sometimes he'd play one night, sometimes two, sometimes he'd play a whole week. And if you got there early enough, you could get a seat right next to the drums, which was the power of that band was just amazing. And in fact, of course, there's a DVD that I think Hudson put out, which was originally done by WXXI in Rochester, the PBS station. It's called Rich at the Top, and it was recorded there at the top of the plaza. And it's a very famous recording. And of course, the clips from it, I'm sure, are on YouTube like everything else now. But the fact that my dad would take me up there and we get to hear that and experience that live. And of course, then later, when my friend Barry Kiener became Buddy's pianist, we would go and hang out, with Buddy, either backstage or on the bus, on the breaks. And of course, everyone that's heard those tapes has their own opinion.
Yeah.
But, just like some people say about Jerry Lewis, I can say this about Buddy. He was always very nice to me.
I would say the same thing. And I'm really lucky that Ned Corman, who was my jazz band teacher, he took me to meet Buddy twice. And he was the nicest guy to me. He was really cool. And the other thing, this is kind of weird, but I remember from seeing him play live, the thing that always impressed me the most is his single stroke roll. It was like a freight train. It was frightening. Yeah. It was so powerful. And then on a side note, he always had that little splash cymbal. And I remember as a young boy, like waiting, when's he going to hit it?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, he always had the second floor tom, which I don't think he ever really played, but mostly served as a towel holder, from what I remember back in the day. But it was just always just incredible getting to witness that live. It was.
He was the one of a kind. One of a kind. There will never be.
Absolutely one of a kind. And I'll never forget what he loved Barry. Barry was his favorite piano player of all time.
Oh wow!
And if you get that Buddy Rich Trios recording, you really get to hear how we interacted with Barry, and they interacted between each other. But I'll never forget I am recording somewhere where sometimes like he would let Barry play the drums and then Buddy would play the piano.
Wow!
And it was hilarious. It was very funny. But they used to joke around. But they did a lot. They did, there's trio performances of him and Buddy, and I think maybe Tom Warrington on bass, from the Tonight Show, where they would play La Fiesta or, some other trio tunes. And he would often feature the trio within, the big band.
Yeah. And I was a music teacher out here with an elementary school and a middle school for about 12 years. And every year I would show the clip from when Buddy was on the Muppet Show. And not only did he play a great solo and a drum battle with Animal, but one of my favorite parts is he's just walking through backstage and playing a solo on everything that he finds, like on the walls and on the tables. Yeah. It's just so cool.
Yeah.
All right, well, Dave, before we go, what can I do to help you promote what's going on? So if people want to contact you or follow what you're up to, what social media are you on these days?
Okay, well, these days, I'm not that hip, so I am on Facebook, but if you want to go to find out a little more about CMD, you can go to cmdjazz.com.
Okay. Right.
But we're on, of course, all the streaming services, as you kind of have to be these days. And you
got your Primetime Funk website, right?
Right, primetimefunk.com as well. Yeah, those are the two things, mainly that I'm up to right now, besides, the various subbing gigs and different pickup gigs that I'm doing. And in addition, occasional studio work as well.
Well, and you've got your store, the Drum Corner, too.
Yeah.
If people want to take drum lessons from you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
They can go to thedrumcorner.com, where they can email me through the Drum Corner website, and I'll be happy to hook them up and give them some info about lessons.
Yeah, and what, other than your newer band, what other performances do you have coming up soon?
Oh, let's see. I got to look at the calendar here. Well, there's, aside from the CMD trio, I also play in a trio with a great jazz pianist named Bobby DeBotto.
Okay.
Bobby was also a former Penfield guy, and he was actually very close with Barry Kiener. So I would put Bobby in the category of, like, he plays a lot like the old style, like Red Garland and Wynton Kelly, that kind of style.
Cool.
So he has an acoustic trio that we play at this restaurant like once a month, a place up by the lake called Hedges.
Yeah.
That we play at. So I've got a gig with him coming up in the next few weeks, and just a bunch of little things here and there right now. Summer's very busy around here.
Right.
Because we have the Rochester Jazz Festival in June, and then the summer's usually a lot of gigs. And then things tend to slow down once you get past the fall. So, but I've got some other things coming up. There's there's a theatrical production that I play every year at the Jewish Community Center here in Rochester, and it's a series called Hitmakers. And this started, back like 11 years ago, and it's basically a kind of like a jukebox show, I guess you would call it.
Yep.
But it kind of goes from, it started back, with the hits of the 50s, and now we're up to, the 70s and 80s. So it's like kind of a show where you're doing, maybe 32 songs in the show. With maybe 8 to 10 vocalists that we're backing.
Wow, that sounds really fun.
We do that every February. Yeah, we do that every February. The show runs about 3 weeks, something like 13 or 14 performances, and that's basically with CMD is the rhythm section plus a guitarist named Mark Balestra, who we play with often, who's actually guesting on some of the upcoming holiday release that CMD is doing. And then there's another project. We did it at the JCC, but I'm going to Florida in March of next year to play this show. It's actually a children's theater show called Lika, and it's about a little dog. but a lot of the parts in the show are done using puppetry. Ooh, which I know you're a big fan of. I'm a big fan,
yeah.
Yeah, and fortunately, the puppetry people that we've been working with, or when we did the show here in Rochester, and then we'll be doing it in Orlando, are all people that work at Disney.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to doing that in March of next year. Just for a few performances, and we're actually trying to squeeze in a CMD trio performance at the same theater if possible. So we'll see if that happens.
Wow, you're a busy guy.
Yeah, and then of course the Hall of Fame again will be coming up next April. So we generally start preparing for that sometime in February or March. Hopefully, if we don't get the music at the last minute, like sometimes happens.
Oh man! Well, listen, Dave, it was so great to catch up with you, and I always
too, man.
I like to interview people I know because I always find out things I never knew.
Right, exactly. Thanks so much for the opportunity, man. I appreciate it. A big supporter of what you're doing. I think it's just great, and I've really enjoyed listening to the podcast. And thanks for asking me to be a part of it.
All right, I appreciate it. Good to talk to you, Dave.
You too, man. Take care. I was working on this recording project with Jeff Tyzik for this singer from Hawaii, a guy named Glenn Medeiros, and we ended up,
I know who that is.
cutting. You know who that is. So
Yep.
we cut it, some tracks that Jeff was producing. There were other producers on this album, but I was so proud when the album came out because I was on just like one track, I think, but on the other tracks were like JR and Jeff Porcaro.
Wow.
So
That's amazing.
So I got to at least one album credit with Jeff, and I know there was an album that was like a local music thing that was like a Christmas album that came out maybe 15 years ago that Steve was on and PTF was on it. So I got to be
You know
on
what,
album
though?
with him too.
You're really giving me a flashback because, as you know, I worked at Record Theater in Midtown.
Yeah.
And I remember.
So did my wife, believe it or not.
So the guy that owned both the record theaters, the one in Rochester and
Lenny
Buffalo,
Silver.
yeah, he had his own record label, and that's how I know
Yep.
who Glenn Medeiros is because I remember how
Right,
we
because-
had to push that album.
Yep.